New York City, 2025, pulsed with the relentless energy of a metropolis that never slept. Skyscrapers pierced the clouds, their glass facades reflecting the dreams and ambitions of millions. At the heart of this urban jungle stood Michael Carter, a 35-year-old billionaire whose name was synonymous with success. With a net worth exceeding $7 billion, he owned luxury hotel chains, a private airline, sprawling shopping malls, cutting-edge tech startups, and the crown jewel of his empire, Carter Memorial Hospital, a beacon of medical excellence in America. His life was a tapestry of opulence. Private jets whisked him across continents. Designer suits draped his frame, and penthouses with panoramic views were his sanctuaries. Yet, beneath the glittering surface, Michael's heart was a hollow chamber. The women who flocked to him saw only his wealth, his power. His name, not the man who yearned for a connection untainted by dollar signs. In a world where every smile seemed calculated, every handshake a transaction, Michael craved pure love, a love that saw the humble soul beneath the billionaire's mask. So he made a decision that would shock even his closest confidants. He would shed his identity, trade his tailored suits for a janitor's uniform, and work as a nobody in his hospital. Only in anonymity, he believed, could he find a heart that loved him for who he truly was. Michael chose Carter Memorial Hospital as his testing ground, a place where life and death danced in delicate balance, where raw human emotions stripped away pretense. He arrived at the hospital's service entrance on a crisp autumn morning, not in a chauffeured limousine, but on foot, wearing a faded blue janitor's uniform and scuffed sneakers. His alias, Adam Jones, was scrawled on a name tag pinned to his chest. No one batted an eye as he slipped through the back door, blending into the stream of workers bustling through the labyrinthine corridors. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and the faint hum of machinery, a stark contrast to the perfumed boardrooms he was accustomed to. His first task was to report to Helen Parker, the head of the custodial department, a woman whose reputation for severity preceded. Her Helen was a towering figure with a pinched face and eyes that seemed to dissect everyone in her path. "You're the new guy, Adam," she barked, barely glancing up from her clipboard. "Don't stand there gawking. Grab a mop and start on the East Wing. I don't tolerate slackers." Michael nodded silently, suppressing the urge to smile at the irony. In his real life, he could have fired her with a single phone call. Here, he was just another worker under her iron fist. The work was grueling, a far cry from the cushioned existence he'd known. Michael pushed a heavy mop across endless tiled floors, the handle digging into his palms. He scrubbed sinks, emptied trash bins overflowing with medical waste, and hauled heavy bags to the dumpster under the watchful eye of Helen, who seemed to take pleasure in pointing out every missed spot. "You call that clean?" she'd snap, her voice echoing through the halls. "My grandmother could do better, and she's half blind." Michael bit his tongue, reminding himself of his purpose. He wasn't here to prove his worth as a janitor, but to find something far more valuable. A proverb his grandmother often recited echoed in his mind. "The pearl lies not in the oyster's shine, but in its hidden depths." He was diving deep, now, searching for that rare pearl in a sea of indifference. The hospital was a microcosm of humanitarian nurses rushing with trays of medical supplies, doctors barking orders, patients and families whispering hopes or weeping losses. Michael observed it all from the sidelines, invisible in his role. The custodial staff, a mix of overworked men and women, barely acknowledged him. They were too busy surviving Helen's wrath or scraping by on their meager wages. Lunch breaks were spent in a cramped break room where Michael sat alone with a vending machine sandwich, listening to the chatter of others who ignored the new guy. Yet, amid the chaos, he began to notice her. Sarah Brooks, a medical assistant in the intensive care unit. She was slight, with chestnut hair tied in a neat ponytail and eyes that held a quiet strength. Unlike the others, Sarah moved with a purpose that wasn't driven by fear or ambition. She knelt beside patients, holding their hands through pain. Her voice soft but steady as she offered comfort. One afternoon, Michael watched her sit with an elderly woman, whispering words of encouragement as the woman clutched a rosary. The tenderness in Sarah's actions stirred something in him. A flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd found someone different. Their first real interaction came by chance. Michael was mopping the ICU hallway when Sarah hurried past, her arms full of patient charts. A folder slipped from her grasp, papers scattering across the floor. Before she could react, Helen stormed over, her heels clicking like gunshots. "Brooks, are you trying to make a mess of my hospital?" She sneered, her voice loud enough to draw stares. Sarah's cheeks flushed, but she knelt to gather the papers, apologizing softly. Without thinking, Michael stepped forward, dropping to one knee to help her. Their hands brushed as they reached for the same sheet, and Sarah looked up, startled. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes met his, and for a moment the hospital's chaos faded. Michael offered a small nod, his heart racing. "No problem," he replied, his voice rougher than he intended. Helen scoffed, muttering about wasting time, but Michael barely heard her. That brief moment with Sarah felt like the first real connection he'd made in years. Over the next few days, Michael found himself watching Sarah whenever their paths crossed. She was different, not just in her kindness, but in the way she carried herself, like someone who'd known hardship but refused to let it define her. He saw her slip a granola bar to a hungry colleague, stay late to help a nurse with a difficult patient. And once, when no one else was around, he caught her humming a soft tune as she cleaned medical equipment, a faint smile on her lips. Her presence was a quiet rebellion against the hospital's cold efficiency, a reminder that humanity could thrive even in the hardest places. Michael began to seek out moments to be near her, volunteering for extra shifts in the ICU, though it meant enduring more of Helen's tirades. He didn't care. Each glimpse of Sarah was a step closer to the truth he sought. One evening, as he hauled trash bags to the dumpster, Michael overheard Sarah talking to a coworker in the break room. Her voice was low, heavy with emotion. "I grew up in Brooklyn, in a place where you either fought or gave up," she said. "My mom died when I was 12, of cancer. We couldn't afford the treatment. I promised her I'd become a doctor, so no one else would have to feel that helpless." Her words hit Michael like a freight train. He stood frozen outside the door, the trash bag heavy in his hands. Sarah wasn't chasing fame or fortune. She was chasing a promise, a dream born from loss. In that moment, he knew she was the one. He'd been searching for a woman whose heart was untouched by the greed that tainted so many others in his life. But how could he reach her without revealing who he was? The risk was too great. Sarah knew he was Michael Carter, the billionaire. Her perception of him might change. He needed to stay, Adam, the janitor, a little longer. Yet he couldn't stand by and watch her struggle. He learned, through discreet inquiries, that Sarah was drowning in student loan debt for medical school, working double shifts to keep up with payments. Her dream was within reach, but the weight of it was crushing her. Michael decided to act, but in secret. One night, he slipped into the hospital's administrative office, his cap pulled low to avoid recognition. He found a junior accountant, a young man named Tu, who looked too tired to ask questions. "There's a medical assistant named Sarah Brooks," Michael said, his voice low. "She's got student loans. Want to pay off a chunk of them anonymously? No one can know it was me." He slid a thick envelope of cash across the desk, enough to cover half her debt. Tom's eyes widened, but he nodded. "You're doing a good thing, man," he said. Michael only shrugged and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the hospital. The next day, Sarah was different. Michael noticed it as he mopped the ICU floor. Her steps were lighter, her smile brighter. She didn't know who her benefactor was, but the relief was evident in her eyes. During a break, she sat in the courtyard, staring at a letter from her school, her fingers tracing the words as if they were a miracle. Michael watched from a distance, leaning on his mop, a quiet satisfaction warming his chest. He remembered another of his grandmother's sayings, "A gift given in secret shines brightest in the heart." He didn't need her to know it was him not yet. For now, it was enough to see her hope rekindled, to know he'd eased her burden, even if just a little. But the hospital was not a kind place, and Helen made sure of that. Her reign over the custodial staff was tyrannical, her words sharp as knives. One afternoon, she caught Michael lingering near the ICU, watching Sarah help a patient. "Jones," she bellowed, her voice cutting through the hum of the hospital. "You're paid to clean, not to daydream. Get back to the storage rooms now." Michael nodded, his jaw tight, and shuffled away. The other workers snickered behind their hands, used to Helen's outbursts. But Michael didn't care about their laughter or her scorn. He was here for a purpose greater than pride. Still, Helen's cruelty wasn't limited to him. She targeted Sarah too, berating her for taking too long with patients, for being too soft. "This isn't a charity, Brooks," Helen snapped one day as Sarah helped a grieving family. "Do your job and move on." Sarah's face remained. But Michael saw the tightness in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched at her sides. He wanted to step in to shield her, but he held back. Adam Jones had no power here, and Michael Carter had to stay hidden. As days turned into weeks, Michael adapted to the rhythm of his double life. The blisters on his hands hardened, the ache in his back became familiar, and the hospital's cold. Indifference became his new normal. Yet, every moment with Sarah was a spark in the darkness. They began to exchange small words, "Good morning" here, a thanks there. Once, when he helped her carry a heavy tray of supplies, she laughed softly and said, "You're stronger than you look, Adam." The compliment, simple as it was, warmed him more than any boardroom victory. He began to see the hospital through her eyes, not as a machine of efficiency, but as a place where every life mattered, where every small act of kindness could change someone's day. One rainy afternoon, as Michael scrubbed a particularly stubborn stain in the hallway, a commotion broke out in the ICU. A young boy, no older than 10, had collapsed during a visit to his sick father. Nurses rushed to help, but Sarah was there first, kneeling beside the boy, checking his pulse with steady hands. Michael abandoned his mop and ran to assist, fetching a stretcher as Sarah called for a doctor. Together, they moved the boy to a bed, Sarah's voice calm and authoritative despite the chaos. "You're going to be okay," she told the boy, her hand gently squeezing his. Michael stood back, watching her work, marveling at her composure. When the boy stabilized, Sarah let out a shaky breath and turned to Michael. "Thanks for the help," she said, her eyes meeting his with gratitude. For the first time, he felt like more than a shadow in her world. That night, as he lay on the thin cot in the custodial break room, Michael stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. Sarah was more than a kind heart, she was a force, a woman who carried her dreams through a world that tried to break her. He wanted to do more than just watch her from afar. He wanted to help her soar, to see her become the doctor she was meant to be. But he knew the truth would come at a cost. If she learned who he was, would she see him as the man who shared her struggles, or as the billionaire who'd deceived her? The question gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside. For now, he would keep his secret, keep helping her in the shadows, and keep hoping that the pearl he'd found in the depths of Carter Memorial would one day be his. As the city lights glittered outside, Michael closed his eyes, whispering to himself a final thought. The heart that seeks truth must first learn to wait. He was waiting, but with every passing day, he felt closer to the love he'd always dreamed of, a love that saw beyond wealth, beyond power, beyond everything the world worshipped. New York City, 2025. Shimmered under a gray autumn sky, the air heavy with the threat of rain. Inside Carter Memorial Hospital, Michael Carter, disguised as Adam Jones, pushed his mop across the tiled floors, the rhythmic swish of water blending with the hum of ventilators and distant voices. The hospital was a world of its own, a place where hope and despair collided, and Michael, once a king in boardrooms, was now a silent observer in this kingdom of healing and loss. As Adam, he was invisible, just another janitor in a sea of blue uniforms, but his heart was fixed on one person, Sarah Brooks, the medical assistant whose quiet strength and boundless compassion had become his beacon. Her simple act of sharing a granola bar with a struggling coworker, her gentle words to a dying patient, her refusal to let the hospital's harshness dim her light, these were the sparks that kept Michael coming back, day after day, to this grueling charade. But the path to her heart was fraught with obstacles, not least of which was Helen Parker, the custodial supervisor whose venomous tongue lashed out at anyone in her path. Michael was determined to stay the course, to nurture the fragile connection growing between him and Sarah. But the hospital's unforgiving rhythm and Helen's relentless cruelty would test his resolve in ways he never imagined. The days at Carter Memorial were long, the work relentless. Michael's hands, once accustomed to signing multi-million-dollar contracts, were now calloused from scrubbing floors and hauling trash. His back ached from hours of bending, his shoulders stiff from lifting heavy bins. Helen made sure no one rested easily. Jones, she'd bark, her voice cutting through the hospital's din. You missed a spot in the West Wing. Do it again, and don't make me come check. Michael would nod, his jaw tight, and redo the work, even when the floors gleamed. Helen's tyranny wasn't personal. She was an equal opportunity oppressor, her sharp words raining down on everyone, from janitors to nurses. But Michael noticed. She reserved a special disdain for Sarah, whose kindness seemed to irritate her like a splinter under the skin. Brooks, stop coddling the patients. Helen snapped one morning as Sarah adjusted a pillow for an elderly man in the ICU. You're not their mother. Move. Sarah's face remained calm, but Michael saw the flicker of hurt in her eyes, the way her hands tightened briefly before she moved on. He wanted to intervene, to tell Helen to back off, but Adam Jones was powerless, and Michael Carter had to stay hidden. Despite the hospital's cold atmosphere, Sarah was a quiet rebellion against its harshness. Michael watched her from the corners of his eyes as he worked, noting the small ways she brought warmth to a sterile world. One afternoon, he saw her slip a coloring book and crayons to a young girl waiting anxiously outside the surgical ward, her mother undergoing an operation. Something to keep you busy, Sarah whispered, winking. The girl's face lit up, and Michael felt a pang in his chest. Sarah didn't just do her job. She carried light into places where darkness reigned. He began to seek out moments to be near her, volunteering for extra shifts in the ICU, even though it meant more of Helen's scrutiny. Their interactions were brief but meaningful, a shared nod in the hallway, a quick thanks when he held a door open, a fleeting smile when their eyes met. Each moment was a thread, weaving a connection that Michael guarded fiercely, even as he wrestled with the weight of his deception. One evening, as Michael emptied trash cans in the ICU, a crisis erupted. A patient, a middle-aged man with a failing heart, crashed. Alarms blared, nurses scrambled, and doctors shouted orders. Sarah was at the man's bedside, her hands steady as she assisted the crash team, passing instruments and monitoring vitals. Michael, forgotten in the chaos, stood by with his mop, watching her work with a calm precision that belied the panic around her. When the patient stabilized, the room exhaled. But Sarah stayed, holding the man's hand as he drifted into a medicated sleep. She didn't leave until his wife arrived, tears streaming down her face. Sarah spoke to her softly, offering words of comfort that Michael couldn't hear but could feel, like a warm breeze in the cold room. As the wife clutched Sarah's hand, Michael's resolve hardened. Sarah wasn't just kind. She was a lifeline. A woman who gave everything to others despite having so little herself. He knew then that he had to do more than watch her struggle. He had to help her. Even if it meant risking his cover. Michael's first act of aid came quietly, as all his plans did. He'd learned through hospital gossip that Sarah was juggling night classes at NYU's medical school, her dream of becoming a doctor hanging by a thread of student loans and double shifts. The weight of her debt was a constant shadow, draining her energy and dimming her hope. Michael couldn't bear it. One night, after his shift, he slipped into the hospital's administrative wing, his cap pulled low. He found Tom, the junior accountant from his previous visit, working late. "Tom," Michael said, his voice low but firm, "I need you to do something for me. Sarah Brooks clear. Another chunk of her student loans. Same deal as before. Number, names, no questions." He handed over another envelope, thicker this time, stuffed with cash. Tom's eyes widened, but he nodded. "You're changing her life, you know," he said, a hint of awe in his voice. Michael only shrugged. "Just make sure she doesn't know." As he walked away, the weight of his secret felt heavier, but the thought of Sarah's relief made it bearable. The next morning, Sarah was a different woman. Michael noticed it as he swept the ICU hallway. Her steps lighter, her eyes brighter. She clutched a letter from her school, her fingers trembling with excitement. During a break, she sat in the courtyard reading and rereading the words, a smile breaking across her face. Michael watched from a distance, leaning on his broom, his heart swelling. He didn't need her gratitude. Her joy was enough. But the hospital's harsh reality soon intruded. Helen stormed into the courtyard, her clipboard in hand. She barked. "Break's over. Get back to the ICU before I write you up." Sarah's smile faltered, but she nodded and hurried inside. Michael's fists clenched. Helen's cruelty was a constant thorn, pricking at everyone's spirits, but he couldn't act not yet. He reminded himself of his grandmother's words. "The river flows slowly, but it carves the mountain." Patience was his weapon, and he would wield it carefully as the weeks passed. Michael and Sarah's paths crossed more often. They began to share small moments of quick chat in the break room, a laugh over a spilled coffee. One day, as they cleaned a storage room together, Sarah noticed Michael struggling with a heavy box of supplies. "Lift with your knees, not your back," she said, her voice gentle but firm. She demonstrated her movements, sure, despite her small frame. Michael followed her lead, grateful for the lesson and the chance to be near her. "Took me a while to get the hang of it too," she added, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. For a moment, they worked side by side, the clatter of the hospital fading into the background. Michael felt a peace he hadn't known in years, a sense that here, in this forgotten corner of his empire, he was closer to something real than he'd ever been in his penthouse. Their bond grew stronger during a rainy afternoon in the hospital courtyard. A sudden downpour trapped the staff inside, and Michael found Sarah under the awning of the old oak tree, her lunch's simple peanut butter sandwich sitting untouched on her lap. He joined her, his lunch forgotten, in the break room. They sat in companionable silence, the rain drumming around them. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice soft. "You ever feel like you're running in place, Adam?" she asked, staring at the rain. Michael hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes," he said, his voice low. "Like No matter how hard you try, the world keeps pushing back. Sarah's eyes met his, searching. Exactly, she said. I work, I study, I save every penny, but it's never enough. I just want to make a difference, you know? For people like my mom. Her voice cracked, and she looked away, embarrassed. Michael's heart ached. He wanted to tell her about the payments, about the hope he was trying to give her, but he held back. Instead, he said, "You're already making a difference, Sarah. Every day." She looked at him, surprised, then smiled a small, genuine smile that lit up the gray day. That moment under the oak tree marked a turning point. Sarah began to seek Michael out, not consciously, but in small ways, sitting near him during breaks, asking his opinion on trivial things, like whether the cafeteria soup was worth trying. Michael cherished these moments, but they came with a cost. Helen's scrutiny intensified, her sharp eyes catching every interaction. One day, as Michael and Sarah laughed over a shared joke in the break room, Helen stormed in. "Jones, Brooks, this isn't a social club," she snapped. "Get back to work before I dock your pay." Sarah flushed, but Michael just nodded, his calm masking the anger simmering beneath. He hated how Helen's words dimmed Sarah's light, how her cruelty seemed to target the kindest souls. But he couldn't confront her not as Adam. He had to stay invisible, at least for now. Michael's secret acts of kindness continued. When he learned Sarah's mother, who lived in a rundown apartment in Brooklyn, was struggling with diabetes, he acted again. Disguised in a hoodie, he visited a local pharmacy near Sarah's neighborhood, paying for a month's supply of her mother's medication and arranging for it to be delivered anonymously through a hospital welfare program. He left a note with the package, "For a fighter who never gives up. Keep going." When Sarah received it, she was bewildered, her eyes wide with wonder as she told a coworker about the miracle. Michael overheard her, his heart pounding with a mix of pride and fear. She was starting to notice the pattern, to sense that someone was watching over her. He had to be more careful, but he couldn't stop. Helping her felt like the only way to bridge the gap between Adam Jones and Michael Carter. One evening, a new challenge arose. The hospital was hit with a flu outbreak, stretching the staff thin. Sarah worked double shifts, her face pale with exhaustion, but her resolve unshaken. Michael, too, stayed late, volunteering to clean the overflow wards. Late one night, as he disinfected a room, he found Sarah slumped in a chair, her head resting on her arms. She'd fallen asleep, a stack of patient charts beside her. Michael hesitated, then gently draped his jacket over her shoulders. She stirred, blinking up at him. "Adam," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. "You're still here?" He nodded, his throat tight. "Couldn't leave you to handle this alone," he said. She smiled, a tired but warm smile. And for a moment, they just looked at each other, the hospital's chaos fading away. "You're a good guy, Adam," she said softly, before drifting back to sleep. Michael stood there, his heart racing, knowing he was falling deeper into a truth he couldn't yet reveal. But the hospital wasn't just a place of quiet moments. It was also a battleground. Helen's cruelty reached a new low one morning when she caught Sarah helping a homeless man who'd wandered into the ER, disoriented and sick. Sarah was guiding him to a bed, her voice gentle, when Helen stormed over. "Brooks, this isn't a shelter," she shouted, loud enough for the entire ward to hear. "Get him out, or I'll have security do it." The man shrank back, his eyes wide with fear, but Sarah stood her ground. "He needs help, Helen," she said, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. "This is a hospital, not a prison." Helen's face turned crimson, her mouth opening to unleash another tirade. But a doctor intervened, diffusing the situation. Michael, watching from the hallway, felt a surge of admiration for Sarah's courage. She wasn't just kind, she was fearless, standing up for what was right even when it cost her. That incident sparked something in Michael. He couldn't keep hiding forever, but he also couldn't risk losing Sarah's trust. He began to plan his next move, something bigger than anonymous payments. The hospital's welfare program, underfunded and overlooked, could be a way to help. Not just Sarah, but others like her. He started making calls from a burner phone, directing funds to the program under the guise of an anonymous donor. He ensured the money would support staff like Sarah, those who worked tirelessly but were crushed by financial burdens. When news of the donation spread, the hospital buzzed with excitement. Sarah, hearing about it during a break, shook her head. In wonder, "Someone out there believes in us," she said to a coworker, her voice full of hope. Michael, overhearing her, felt a pang of guilt. He wanted to tell her it was him, that he believed in her more than anyone, but the time wasn't. Right as the flu outbreak waned, Michael and Sarah's bond grew stronger. They started sharing lunch breaks under the oak tree, trading stories about their lives, or at least, Sarah shared hers. Michael listened, weaving careful half-truths about Adam's past, claiming he'd grown up in a small town, working odd jobs to get by. Sarah opened up about her childhood in Brooklyn, the nights she went to bed hungry, the promise she'd made to her dying mother. "I don't want to just be a doctor," she said one day, her eyes distant. "I want to build a clinic someday for people who can't afford care, a place where no one's turned away." Michael nodded, his heart swelling with respect. Her dream wasn't just noble. It was a mirror of the values he'd lost sight of in his rise to wealth. He wanted to tell her he could make that clinic a reality, but he held back, knowing that truth would change everything. One evening, as they sat under the oak tree, a storm rolling in from the horizon, Sarah turned to him, her expression serious. "Adam, why do you stay here?" she asked. "This job, this place, sits brutal. You could do better." Michael hesitated, caught off guard. "Maybe I'm looking for something," he said finally, his voice low. "Something real." Sarah studied him, her eyes searching his face. "I hope you find it," she said softly. "You deserve it." The words hit him like a wave, and for the first time, he felt the weight of his deception like a physical thing pressing against his chest. He wanted to tell her everything, his real name, his real life, his real feelings, but fear held him back. What if she saw him as a liar? What if she turned away? As the storm broke, rain pounding the courtyard, Michael and Sarah ran for cover, laughing despite the downpour. They ended up in a storage closet, dripping wet, their breaths mingling in the cramped space. Sarah shook her head, her laughter fading into a smile. "You're different, Adam," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Most people here just survive. You see people." Michael's heart pounded. He wanted to reach for her, to bridge the gap between them, but he held back. Instead, he smiled, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "You make it easy to see the good, Sarah," he said. She blushed, looking away, and in that moment, Michael knew he was in love not with an idea, but with her. The woman who'd shared her sandwich, her dreams, her heart. But the hospital's harsh reality wasn't done with them. The next day, a new crisis emerged. A pipe burst in the ICU, flooding the ward. Michael and Sarah worked side by side to move equipment and patients, their teamwork seamless despite the chaos. When Helen arrived, she blamed Sarah for the mess, accusing her of negligence. "You're useless, Brooks," she shouted, her voice echoing. Michael's temper flared, but Sarah placed a hand on his arm, her touch calming him. "It's not worth it," she whispered. Later, as they cleaned up the last of the mess, Sarah sighed. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm strong enough for this," she admitted. Michael looked at her, his voice firm. "You're stronger than anyone here, Sarah. Don't ever doubt that." She smiled, a spark of hope returning to her eyes, and Michael knew he'd do anything to keep that spark alive, As the days turned colder, Michael's secret weighed heavier. Sarah was starting to notice the miracles in her life that paid loans, the medicine for her mother, the new scrubs that appeared in her locker. One evening, as they shared a coffee in the break room, she looked at him, her eyes narrowing. "Adam, do you believe in guardian angels?" she asked. Michael's heart skipped a beat. "Maybe," he said, his voice careful. "Why?" Sarah leaned closer, her voice low. "Because someone's been helping me, and I don't know who." "But it started when you showed up." Michael forced a laugh, deflecting. "You think I'm sneaking around paying your bills?" he teased. Sarah smiled, but her eyes were sharp. "Maybe not," she said. "But you're not like the others, Adam. I see you." The words sent a shiver down him. She was closer to the truth than she knew. And Michael realized his time in the shadows was running out as he lay on his cot that night. The hospital quiet except for the distant beep of monitors. Michael stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. Sarah was his light, his reason for enduring Helen's cruelty, the hospital's grind, the weight of his lie. But the truth was a storm on the horizon, and he knew it would break soon. He whispered to himself, echoing his grandmother's wisdom. "The heart that hides in shadows will find its home in the light." He was ready to step into that light, but only if Sarah was there with him. For now, he would keep helping her, keep loving her from afar, and keep hoping that when the mask fell, she would see the man beneath, not the billionaire, but the one who'd fallen for her under the oak tree in the heart of Carter Memorial. New York City, late autumn 2025, was cloaked in a restless chill, the kind that seeped into bones and hearts alike. A storm loomed over the skyline, its dark clouds mirroring the turmoil in Michael Carter's soul. For weeks, he had lived as Adam Jones, a janitor at Carter Memorial Hospital, his empire, scrubbing floors and hauling trash to hide his identity as a billionaire. His mission was singular: to find a love untainted by his wealth, a love that saw the man, not the money. In Sarah Brooks, a medical assistant with a heart as resilient as it was kind, he had found that love. Her quiet courage, her unwavering compassion, her dream to become a doctor for the forgotten, these were the beacons that had drawn him in, guiding him through the hospital's cold halls. But now, as rain lashed against the windows of Carter Memorial, Michael stood at a crossroads. Sarah was beginning to suspect the guardian angel behind her recent miracles-paid loans, medicine for her mother, small gifts that eased her burdens. The truth, his truth, could no longer be contained. Tonight, under the old oak tree in the hospital courtyard, Michael would shed his mask, risking everything for a chance at the love he'd come to cherish. Would Sarah embrace the man she'd known as Adam? Or would the revelation of his billionaire status shatter the fragile bond they'd built? The hospital pulsed, with its usual chaos, nurses darting between rooms, doctors issuing clipped orders, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic and urgency. Michael, in his faded blue uniform, pushed a cart of cleaning supplies through the ICU, his eyes scanning for Sarah. She was there, tending to a patient with a gentleness that made the sterile room feel human. But her face was different today. Her brow furrowed, her movements distracted. Michael knew why. Yesterday, in the break room, she'd looked at him with sharp, searching eyes and asked, "Adam, are you my guardian angel?" The question had caught him off guard, and he deflected with a laugh, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Sarah was too smart, too observant, to ignore the pattern of kindness that had followed her since Adam Jones arrived. Michael's heart pounded as he mopped the floor, his mind racing. He couldn't hide forever, but the fear of losing her trust gnawed at him. He needed to act, to reveal himself, but the hospital had other plans. A crisis was brewing, one that threatened to upend everything. Carter Memorial was facing a budget shortfall, a fact Michael had learned through discreet calls to his CFO, Rachel. The hospital's board, unaware of his presence as a janitor, was pushing to cut costs, starting with staff layoffs in the lower ranks, including medical assistants like Sarah. The news hit Michael like a punch. Sarah, who poured her soul into every patient, who worked double shifts to fund her medical school dreams, could lose her job. He couldn't let that happen, not to her, not to the others who toiled in the shadows of his empire. But acting as Michael Carter, the billionaire, meant exposing his identity. He wrestled with the decision, his mop moving in slow, deliberate strokes as he thought. His grandmother's words echoed in his mind. The tree that stands tall in the storm is the one with roots deep in truth. He had to act, not as Adam, but as Michael, even if it meant risking everything. That afternoon, Michael slipped away during a break, pulling his cap low and using a back stairwell to reach the administrative wing. He called Rachel from a burner phone, his voice low but commanding. "Rachel, it's me. The budget cuts at Carter Memorial stopped them. I'm wiring funds to cover the shortfall. Make it look like an anonymous donor. No trace to me." Rachel, used to Michael's secretive directives, didn't question him. "Understood, sir. It'll be done by morning." Michael hung up, his pulse racing. The funds would save jobs, including Sarah's, but the move was a crack in his carefully constructed facade. The hospital's grapevine was relentless, and a donation of this magnitude would raise questions. He returned to his cleaning duties, his mind heavy with the weight of what was coming. Sarah, meanwhile, was grappling with her storm. The news of potential layoffs had spread, and the staff was on edge. Michael watched her in the ICU, her hands steady as she changed a patient's IV, but her eyes betrayed her worry. During a rare moment alone, as they restocked supplies in a storage room, Sarah spoke, her voice low. "Adam, have you heard about the cuts? I might not have a job next month. I'm so close to finishing med school, I can't lose this." Her words were a knife to Michael's heart. He wanted to tell her it was taken care of, that he'd made sure she was safe, but Adam Jones couldn't know that. Instead, he offered a small smile. "It'll work out, Sarah. You're too good for them to let you go." She looked at him, her eyes softening. "You always know what to say, don't you?" she said, a hint of a smile breaking through. Michael's chest tightened, was running out of time to keep her in the dark. Helen Parker, the custodial supervisor, remained a relentless force of cruelty. Her reign over the staff was tyrannical, her words sharp as broken glass. One morning, she caught Sarah helping a janitor clean up a spill in the ER, a task outside her duties. "Brooks," Helen bellowed, her voice echoing through the ward, "you're not paid to mop floors. Get back to your station before I report you." Sarah's face flushed, but she nodded, hurrying away. Michael, nearby, clenched his fists, his temper flaring. He wanted to confront Helen to put an end to her reign of terror, but he held back. Adam Jones was powerless, and Michael Carter had to stay hidden for now. But Helen's cruelty wasn't limited to Sarah. She targeted Michael relentlessly, mocking his slow pace, his clumsiness, unaware that the man she insulted owned the very building she stood in. "Jones, you're useless," she snapped one afternoon as he struggled with a heavy trash bin. "Maybe you'd be better off begging on the street." The other janitor snickered, but Michael stayed silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. He reminded himself, the eagle does not fight the snake on the ground. His battle was bigger than Helen's petty tyranny. The hospital's budget crisis came to a head the next day. During a staff meeting, the board announced that an anonymous donor had stepped in, covering the shortfall and saving hundreds of jobs. The room erupted in cheers, and Sarah, standing near Michael, let out a shaky laugh, her eyes shining with relief. "Someone out there's looking out for us," she said, her voice full of wonder. Michael nodded, his heart pounding. He wanted to tell her it was him, that he'd done it for her, for all of them, but the risk was too great. Instead, he watched her joy from the sidelines, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. But the donation had unintended consequences. The hospital's administration began digging into the donor's identity, and whispers of Michael Carter started circulating. Michael overheard two nurses speculating in the break room. "They say it's the big boss himself. Why would he care about us grunts?" Michael's stomach churned. His cover was thinning, and he knew it. Sarah's suspicions grew stronger. The miracles in her life, her paid loans, her mother's medicine, the new scrubs in her locker were too precise, too timely. One evening, as they sat under the oak tree, the sky bruised with storm clouds. She turned to him, her eyes sharp. "Adam, I need to ask you something," she said, her voice steady but intense. "These things happening to me, the money, the gifts that started when you came here. Is it you?" Michael's heart stopped. He'd prepared for this moment, but now, with her eyes locked on his, he felt exposed, vulnerable. He forced a smile, his voice light. "Sarah, I'm just a janitor. How could I afford to pay your loans?" She studied him, her gaze unwavering. "Maybe you're not just a janitor," she said softly. "You're different, Adam. You see things others don't. You care?" The words hit him like a wave, and for a moment he considered telling her everything. But fear held him back. He needed the right moment, the right way to reveal the truth without breaking her trust. That night, the storm broke, rain pounding the hospital like a drum. Michael and Sarah were stuck late, cleaning up after a chaotic shift. As they worked side by side, moving beds to make room for new patients, a new crisis emerged. A fire alarm malfunctioned, sending the hospital into lockdown. Patients were evacuated to safe zones, and staff scrambled to maintain order. Michael and Sarah found themselves in the pediatric ward, calming a group of frightened children. Sarah knelt beside a boy with a broken arm, telling him stories of superheroes to distract him from the blaring alarms. Michael watched, marveling at her ability to bring peace to chaos. When the alarm was finally silenced, the children safe, Sarah slumped against a wall, exhausted. Michael handed her a bottle of water, their fingers brushing. "You're incredible. You know that?" he said, his voice low. Sarah looked up, surprised. "I'm just doing my job," she said, but her smile was warm, and for a moment, the hospital's weight lifted. The lockdown had another effect. It brought the hospital's leadership to the forefront. The board, spooked by the incident, called an emergency meeting, and Michael's CFO, Rachel, hinted that the anonymous donor might attend. Michael knew he couldn't avoid it. If he didn't appear as Michael Carter, the board might dig deeper, exposing him prematurely. He made a decision. He would attend the meeting, but as Adam, he'd ensure Sarah was nowhere near it. He couldn't risk her seeing him in his true role, not yet. He arranged for Sarah to be assigned to a late shift in the pediatric ward, far from the boardroom. But fate had other plans. During the meeting, as Michael sat at the head of the table in a tailored suit, his janitor's uniform stashed in a locker, a junior board member mentioned Adam Jones in passing, noting his dedication during the lockdown. Rachel's eyes flicked to Michael, a silent question. He nodded slightly, signaling her to keep quiet, but the damage was done. The boardroom buzzed with curiosity, and Michael knew his secret was on the brink of unraveling. The next day, the hospital was abuzz with rumors. Sarah, exhausted from her shift, approached Michael in the courtyard, her eyes filled with questions. "Adam, something's going on," she said, her voice low. "The donation, the lockdown, the way people are talking about you. Who are you?" Michael's heart raced. This was at the moment he dreaded and longed for. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling. "Sarah, I need to tell you something," he said, guiding her to the oak tree, its branches swaying in the wind. "I'm not who you think I am." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a hospital ID card he'd kept hidden. It read, Michael Carter, CEO, Carter Memorial Hospital. Sarah's eyes widened, her breath catching. You're the owner, she whispered, her voice trembling. Michael nodded, his eyes locked on hers. I came here as Adam to find someone who could love me for me, not my money. And I found you, Sarah. You're the reason I stayed. Sarah stepped back, her face a storm of emotions, shock, hurt, betrayal. You lied to me, she said, her voice breaking. All this time, you were. What? Playing a game? Pretending to be one of us? Michael's heart sank. It wasn't a game, he said, his voice raw. I needed to know if someone could see me, the real me, not the billionaire. You did, Sarah. You saw me when I was just Adam, mopping floors, eating your sandwiches. You shared your dreams, your heart. I fell in love with you because of that. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, her hands clenching. I trusted you, she whispered. I told you things I've never told anyone, and you were. What? Testing. Me. She turned away, her shoulders shaking. Michael reached for her, but she stepped back. I need time, she said, her voice barely audible. She walked away, leaving Michael under the oak tree, the rain starting to fall again. The next few days were torture. Sarah avoided him, her shifts carefully scheduled to avoid the ICU when he was there. Michael threw himself into his work as Adam, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, but she was a ghost, her absence a weight on his chest. The hospital, meanwhile, was transformed by the donation. Staff morale soared, new equipment arrived, and the layoffs were canceled. But Michael felt no joy. He'd saved the hospital, but he'd lost Sarah Thor, so he feared. He considered leaving, returning to his billionaire life, but the thought of a world without her was unbearable. He needed to make things right, not with money, but with truth. One evening, as the hospital quieted, Michael found Sarah in the pediatric ward, reading to a group of children. He waited until she finished, then approached her, his heart in his throat. Sarah, please, he said, his voice low. Can we talk? She looked at him, her eyes wary but not cold. 5 minutes, she said, leading him to a quiet corner. Michael took a deep breath. I'm sorry I lied, he said. I didn't want to deceive you. I was scared that if you knew who I was, you'd see me differently. But everything I did, the loans, the medicine, the donation, it was because I believe in you. I love you, Sarah. Not as a billionaire, but as the man who saw you under that oak tree, sharing your dreams. Sarah's eyes softened, but she shook her head. Love doesn't hide, Adam Michael. You should have trusted me. Michael nodded, his throat tight. I know, and I'll spend every day proving I'm worthy of your trust, if you'll let me. Sarah was silent for a long moment, her eyes searching his. Then slowly, she nodded. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, she said, but I loved Adam Jones. And maybe I can learn to love Michael Carter too. Michael's heart lifted, a fragile hope taking root. They stood there, the hospital's hum a distant backdrop, as the first steps toward reconciliation were taken. Over the next weeks, they rebuilt their bond, slowly, carefully. Michael, still working as Adam to avoid suspicion, spent more time with Sarah, sharing honest conversations, no longer hiding behind a false name. Sarah, in turn, opened up again, her trust returning like a tide. Months later, Sarah graduated from medical school, her white coat a symbol of her triumph over years of struggle. Michael, now openly Michael Carter, stood in the audience, his heart swelling with pride. At a hospital ceremony, he announced her appointment as head of the new community outreach program, a role that would let her build the clinic she'd dreamed of. The staff cheered, many remembering the days when Sarah mopped floors beside them. Under the oak tree that evening, as the city lights glittered, Sarah took Michael's hand. "You gave me more than money," she said, her voice soft. "You gave me hope." Michael smiled, his grandmother's words ringing true. The heart that loves in truth will always find its home. Together, they built a future at Carter Memorial, not just a hospital, but a place where love, kindness, and dreams thrived, proving that the richest treasures are those earned, not bought.